Let me introduce Professor Bill Rubinstein. Many of you who have been involved in the Shakespeare authorship question for some time will be familiar with Professor Bill Rubinstein, a historian and author. He's worked at various universities throughout his career: Lancaster University in the UK, the Australian National University in Canberra, Deakin University in Victoria, and Aberystwyth University in Wales. He's published widely on subjects such as modern Jewish history, on the wealth holding classes in modern Britain. And of course, in our context, he co-authored with Brenda James, The Truth Will Out, an examination of the role of Sir Henry Neville in the authorship of Shakespeare's works. So as I say, we'll hear from Professor Bill Rubinstein in a moment, and he's going to be talking about untranslated Spanish and Italian sources of Shakespeare's work. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Bill Rubinstein.
Well, thanks for having me. The two things I ought to say first. I'm also the co-author of a second book on Sir Henry Neville with the late Dr. John Casson, which is much more thorough. And it includes Dr. Casson's research, which went to Neville's extensive library, which still exists at Audley End in Essex. Including books which he annotated and that shows the correspondence with Shakespeare's work. The second point I want to make is that I live in Melbourne, Australia, where it's now 6:45 a.m. and I've been up for 2 hours. So if I'm incoherent, that is the main reason, I hope. Now, one of the best known works about the authorship question is this work by Diana Price, and it contains what is probably the most accessible discussion of the works which Shakespeare clearly used in writing some of his plays, which are in foreign languages and had not yet been translated into English. She pinpoints, in particular, François de Belleforest's Histoire Tragique, Ser Giovanni's Il Pecorone, which was published in Milan in 1554, but which was not translated at the time Shakespeare used it into English or French. Cynthios Pita and his works which have been mentioned before. Orgue de Montemayor's Diana, which is in Spanish, which he used for the Two Gentlemen of Verona. And she notes as well that in 4 instances in which Shakespeare's important characters deviate from Arthur Brooke's poem, Romeo and Juliet, Romeo and Juliet agrees with the original version of this work by Luigi de Porto, of which no known English or French translation was in existence at the time. Now, assuming that these are valid uses of evidence and of the sources of Shakespeare's plays, a number of inferences can be drawn from this, which are very important in coming to terms with who the author might have been and what surrounded him in when he was writing this. Obviously, the first inference is that he read these works and used them, if in fact it's true. And secondly, he had access to these works. And thirdly, he knew these foreign languages. Now, all of these suppositions must be true, and they are very different from the William Shakespeare we know. Shakespeare, the man who was of Stratford-on-Avon, who was born in 1564 and died in 1616, had no formal education past the age of 12 or 13. Yet he was learned in many foreign languages. Now, while not impossible, this certainly presents many difficulties in coming to terms with who the author was. And this is one of the main reasons why there is an authorship question. How do we explain this? Well, it seems to me we can't. We must fall back on the proposition that the real author of the plays was a learned man, deeply versed in many multilingual in many languages, who would probably travel to Europe, which, as far as we know, William Shakespeare never did, and also had access to a place, a study in his house or whatever, where he could write at leisure, not bothered by having to buy the books which he had the money to buy, and which William Shakespeare, the playwright, might not have had the money. Now, when we come to Shakespeare, we have to realize exactly what William Shakespeare was doing. And I think this is very seldom brought into account of the authorship question, which chiefly interests me. It seems to me that to posit William Shakespeare, the actor, as the author of the plays, raises matters which are almost impossible to credit. Shakespeare acted in the theater every night for many years, um, and went there night after night to learn to deliver his lines. His lines were changed regularly. It's not the case that he, as if today, where an actor in a West End or Broadway play says the same lines over and over again 50 times as the plays were acted. He had to learn new lines every night. He did this in an open air theater until 1609 in English weather, with an audience which may or may not have been paying the slightest attention to him. The companies that he worked for also went on extensive trips to the around the Britain in provincial tours, played before royal audiences, and so on. Now, William Shakespeare had two households, 3 days travel time apart. One in London, where he had his business as an actor and a theatre sharer, and the other in Stratford-on-Avon, where he had his family. Now, he went back and forth between the two several times a year, in all likelihood, on horseback or in some sort of primitive car, in English weather on unpaved roads. He did this year after year without getting pneumonia, which itself is a miracle. Now, one other thing I left out of this account of his life, he also wrote 37 plays in 23 years. Now, it seems to me that this almost beggars belief. He would have been exhausted mentally and physically before he even started this, and it's extremely difficult to credit that this could have happened, could have been actually the case. Another point to bear in mind is that there are virtually no examples of a working actor over a period of time actually writing plays while he is an actor at that time, or indeed since. There might have been a handful of those who continued to write plays while they were acting, but very few, let alone of Shakespeare's prolific nature, who continued to write plays year after year after he was an actor in the theater. And indeed, why should he? There are playwrights like Ben Jonson, for example, who at the beginning of their career were actors, but they, as quickly as possible, quit that in order to simply concentrate on writing plays. They didn't need the drudgery of being actors. And indeed, it is most of the playwrights at the time in Elizabethan and Jacobean England, needless to say, were not actors. They were simply playwrights or men of leisure or did something else. And indeed, in modern times, it's very difficult to find a playwright of renown who was also an actor for most of his career. Harold Pinter, for example, was an actor at the beginning of his career, but obviously quit it when he could make a living out of writing plays. If you go down the list of great 20th century playwrights, Neil Beckett, Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams, etc., they were not actors. This was very unusual, and I would suggest it was equally unusual back then for a playwright to be an actor full time. Indeed, all of this, it seems to me, compels us to come to the conclusion that the author of the plays must have been a gentleman of leisure, as I say, well-educated, multilingual, who almost certainly had traveled on the continent, and who had both the means and the leisure time to write plays in one particular place. Now think about this for a moment. William Shakespeare was schlepping back and forth between London and Stratford-on-Avon. What did he do? Have books that he was using in a sack of the saddlebag of his horse? Where did he write these? Where were the books? Where did he sit and write them? We don't know. What happened to the books? We don't know. Is this really plausible? Now, these are some of the general points I want to make. It seems to me a study of the Shakespeare authorship question must proceed in part on finding the things which were impossible or very unlikely and implausible for William Shakespeare, the actor, to have done or read or accomplished, and using as a source material in untranslated foreign languages when there is no evidence he knew these languages, no reason why he would have used these books, and in which he may or may not have the means or opportunity to have obtained and read these books, is a very important piece of evidence as to why he did not write the plays. I'd like to stop there and encourage dialogue about this, if I might.
Okay, short and sweet. Let me put a question that has come into the Q&A, and this relates really to your opening statement about Neville's library. And it says, regarding the leading claim that books from Neville's library showed an association with Shakespeare's plays, what sort of so it says, I'd like to know what forensic study one may turn to that establishes that the truth of the implied claim that because the books were in Neville's library, he was the reader responsible for the annotation. It says it's well known that these books contain annotations by more than one reader.
Well, many of them are in his handwriting. We know his handwriting.
We have examples of his handwriting. Yep. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay.
He was the ambassador to France. He went. He was the favorite student of Sir Henry Savile, the great classicist, and went to Europe for 4 years and early in his career, etc., etc.
Yeah. Perhaps. So there'd like to be a follow-up question there. Maybe you can just type it quickly into the Q&A, please. That would be good. There seems to be, in the chat rather than in the questions, there seems to be quite a lot of comment about Shakespeare, the evidence for Shakespeare as a working actor. What have you got to say about that, Bill?
You're quite right. I mean, one assumes that he was a working actor, as well as a theater sharer. Whether there is actually direct evidence for this, we don't know, but I am assuming he was. There's no reason to suppose he wasn't, let's put it that way.
Okay. Going back to the original question, then the follow-up question is, based on whose authority are they in Neville's hand?
What do you mean by authority? I'm not quite sure I follow. You mean, how do we know they're in Neville's hand? Because they're identical to what we know is which documents that he signed and so on.
Right. Okay. Okay. I'm just looking now if there are any other questions coming in. Yeah. So there's still quite a few comments coming in around around the hierarchy, around the handwriting, and maybe afterwards you might want to go into the chat and begin responding to those.
The book I co-authored with John Casson has many photographs of the annotations and of Neville's handwriting.
Right. Okay. That's good to know. It's a question from James Alexander. Would you know this? How many other contemporary libraries were there at the time? And when studied, how many have these sorts of sources?
I don't know is the short answer. I can only answer for this. I would think there were very, very few, well, I mean, possibly the Earl of Oxford had an existing library today. I would not, and several of the others, but it was not as common as all that, I would have thought. I mean, strikingly, there's no library for William Shakespeare. That's the salient point.
Right. Okay. So as I say, there seems to be quite a few comments coming in the chat around the handwriting question, and indeed referring to the book that you wrote with John Casson about that. So it might be worth at some point going into the chat there and having a look at what is being said there. I mean, other than that, I can't really see other questions coming in there, Bill. So I think we might wish to move on, if that's okay.
Fine by me.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Bill, not much reference there to untranslated Spanish and Italian sources.